you, Terry. Um, Terry, and as most of you know, that Thai, all the events are done by volunteers, but volunteers need to be supported by some people too, right? So we have only few people who we call the gems of our Thai organization: Raj, Terry, Ramesh, and Carmen, and some of the folks. They just support this whole organization and all these great events. So let's give them a big round of applause. Looks like you guys didn't eat much. How about, can we do it again? Oh. All right. So let me start with something interesting. So I had the distinct pleasure of introducing Varun today. He's already smiling because we went to the same school in India. And after coming to US, I think I met him one time. I remember in Sunnyvale Wine Festival in late 90s. And then we connected recently again because I wanted him to come and share his story because he'll talk about. But what I remember was he was 1 year senior to me, and I was telling him I still vividly remember in the room in India when you just get admitted to a engineering school, at least in those days, there is something called ragging. So they invite, or they get all, you just like they look at you and you're kind of walking around, you're just shy, you just got out of this, like a 17-year-old or 18-year-old. And so you don't know where to go, and they know that you're a freshman, so they grab you and just take you, and you have to just follow them. So I remember that in his wing, in the dorms, there was a wing facing south. So that's where they were. And so in one room, they were huddled together. I can picture him, and I can also picture two of his other colleagues who are here. And so and me and a bunch of freshmen, we were all huddled together. So I don't know what they did to us, but I was trying to remember that at least I don't have any unpleasant memories. So I'll make sure I'll have a good introduction for him. So at least he's not going to be embarrassed by me talking something they made us do there. I mean, they do a lot of wacky things. I mean, they make you do a lot of wacky things, but they didn't. So with that, how many of entrepreneurs do we have who are currently involved with startups in storage sector? Okay. And how many of you are planning to start a company in the infrastructure? Okay. So the question is, how do you create the most efficient storage platform on the market, right? So this has been the mission of Nimble Storage since Varun and his co-founder Umesh co-founded in 2008. And they took a unique bottoms-up approach to reinventing storage for the next generation data center, which is coupled with a deep commitment to supporting the customers. And of course, it has been exemplified by their technologically groundbreaking and powerful support model. Today, Nimble Storage has been deployed worldwide in various applications and industry verticals. And the company is led by highly experienced industry veterans who have had extensive experience in the technologies and architectures around primary storage, backup storage, and data protection. So prior to Nimble, Varun was vice president of engineering at a company called Peakstream, which was acquired by Google. And before that, he was vice president of engineering at Data Domain. All of you probably know that Data Domain had that, I think, bidding war a few years ago. And he was the 12th employee at Data Domain. And then he built a team which shipped the first product, and it was sold to over 800 plus customers within 2 years of shipping. And of course, he'll tell you why that's important, especially in the storage industry. Because if you went a few years ago, at least 5, 6 years ago, or even many years ago, if you went to any VC and you told them that you were starting a storage company, they will show you the line of companies, they call it along the highway 101, which are like, they invested money and they lost it and no one could succeed. And, Varun can answer some of those questions, why. So before Data Domain, he also spent 6 years at NetApp, where he was the 11th employee there. And earlier, he also worked afterwards as vice president of engineering at Fast Forward Networks. If you remember, it was acquired by Inktomi, so I don't even know who Inktomi is part of now. Yahoo, right. Okay, so, and then he was also at Penisys and Sun Microsystems. Do you notice one thing? He was 11th employee at NetApp, then he was 12 at data domain. So he kind of felt after that he doesn't want to go that direction. He decided he'll remove the second digits, and he became the first employee at, obviously, his company, Nimble Storage. So with that, without taking too much of thrill, I would like to invite Varun to share his colorful, exciting, and amazing entrepreneurial story with us. Let's give him a warm welcome and big round of applause.
Thanks for that very kind introduction, Naveen. I'm glad he doesn't recall what went through the ragging experience. So, so we have a nice introduction there. Okay, is this a clicker? Oh, this one, yeah. All right. So it looks like the market for storage entrepreneurs is kind of depressed right now, and we had one show of hands. This is a talk that is, I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship in general, of course, based around my experience. But there are some very interesting lessons that I got from that. So we'll cover some of that. So a little snapshot about Nimble. So we based it around software. It's really, even though you saw this nice box on the first slide, it really is a very software-intensive system. And so we built a brand new file system, which is a basic underlying foundation for storage. And we also have built a cloud-based management system called InfoSight. And I'll talk about this a little bit further on. But the company itself is going after a large market opportunity. In fact, the external storage business is a $25 billion opportunity, and it's dominated today by some very large companies. So EMC is the #1 company in the external storage market, but then there is NetApp, there's HP, there's Dell, and the vast majority of our sales are competing directly against these very large companies. So that's sort of the market we entered. And it's good and bad. When you enter an existing market, at least the market is there. You're not having to define a market from the ground up. On the other hand, you have to fight against these very strong entrenched companies. And that was part of what we had to do. All right, so just some highlights. We were started in January of 2008. And we were very lucky to get some great investors. So we got Sequoia, Accel, and Lightspeed as our first 3 investors. And we managed to IPO within 6 years of being founded, which was kind of nice. Based on our prior experience, we'd found that it is hard for a company to IPO that quickly, especially in the infrastructure space. So we were one of the fastest growing companies in the infrastructure space. Our market cap has fluctuated, and that's happened to all the recent high growth startups. There's a whole basket of companies that have recently gone public. Palo Alto Networks, Splunk, FireEye, lots of, actually, many of them have Indian founders. And they too have been going on this roller coaster of valuation. Let's see, as Naveen said, my co-founder is Umesh Maheshwari, who was with me at Data Domain, and he's our CTO, brilliant guy, IIT gold medalist, went to MIT, got his PhD, so he's a great partner. And Suresh Vasudevan, who was the #3 guy at NetApp, left there to become CEO of a company called Omnion. That got acquired, and we were able to attract him to be our CEO. And he's just turned out to be a very, very good person to have in that role. So that's the people, and you can see some of the statistics here of how we've grown. So more than doubled every year for the last several years, and our customer count is now over 3,000 people, 3,000 customers, approaching around 6,000 systems in the field. So that's a nice install base. A little bit about my personal history. So I grew up near Bombay, but I did all of my education in Rajasthan. And I should know Marwari, but I never picked it up. I went to school in Ajmer in Rajasthan, and then of course I went to Pilani for my engineering. And then immediately after Pilani, I went to Rice University, got my master's there, and then came to the Valley. So in many ways, this is sort of a typical path followed by many of us here. And so I thought I'll just ask some questions about this. Oh, and I should point out my family. My wife is here, Mala, and I have 2 kids, 6 and 9. So I thought I'll ask some basic questions. So when you realize you want to be an engineer, and I think for me it was, or at least my family realized it when I started taking apart my toys, and as a 7 or 8-year-old, and I could never put them back together. So they didn't look very good from an engineering point of view, but I loved to tinker. And then when did I decide to come to Silicon Valley? Well, in Pilani, when I took my first, this was in the 80s, when I took my first microprocessor course. So one of the initial microprocessors was the 8085 chip, and we had to program it in assembly. And I thought this was the coolest thing, to make a chip do whatever you want. And on the back of all the Intel manuals was the Intel address in Santa Clara, the headquarters. I said, okay, that's where I want to go. So that's how I figured that out. Now, when did I decide I wanted to become an entrepreneur? So you achieve all these steps, you get to Silicon Valley, and actually when I was at Rice University, we were working on old digital systems, and then they introduced these hot new systems from a company called Sun Microsystems. And compared to a digital machine, the Sun machine was really cool. And so I worked on those, and I said, okay, this is the company I want to join. And it also happened to be the hot startup in the Valley. Every few years there's a new hot startup in the Valley, and in the mid-'80s, Sun was the company. So I applied to them a few times, and they finally responded and gave me a job. And now Sun had this great entrepreneurial feel to it. And of course, Vinod Khosla was one of the founders, and several other folks. So that was when you see, founders succeeding, and that was the inspiration to go out and one day start something. All right, so now we come to sort of the entrepreneurship lessons that I've learned. So there are a couple of influential books that I've read, and some of you may have read them. One is, of course, The Innovator's Dilemma. And the basic thinking behind The Innovator's Dilemma, the big question it asks is, why does innovation seem to be concentrated in small companies? Why is it that large companies always seem to be blindsided by new technologies that come in? And he's got some really interesting case studies. He talks about the disk drive business. It started out as 8-inch drives, and then went to 5.25-inch drives, and went to 3.5-inch drives. And every time there was a generation switch, the old companies died and new companies were formed. So it seemed like people should have seen this coming. The old companies that were dominant should have seen this. Didn't happen. They got blindsided. Then he talks about steam shovels. That's how people used to do earth moving before, moving to pneumatic systems, hydraulic-based systems. So companies that we know today, like Caterpillar and Komatsu, before these guys existed, there was a whole group of other companies based on steam shovels who never could make this transition. So lots of interesting stories there about companies dying. And his basic analysis was that companies die because they can't see these innovations coming. So for example, when you went from 5.25-inch disk drives to 3.5-inch disk drives, At that time, when you had 5.25-inch disk drives, there were PCs at that time. There were big fat things that sat on people's desks, and it was fine to have 5.5-inch or 5.25-inch drives at that time. Now there was one company called Compaq that made the first luggable computer, and it was a suitcase-sized thing. It had a CRT built into it, and they needed 3.5-inch drives. And nobody was prepared to build 3.5-inch drives for them. But one company, Maxtor, decided to step up. The other companies were not interested. They never thought that these luggable computers would go anywhere, but they took off. And with them, Maxtor took off, and all the existing vendors of 5.25-inch drives basically, stood by and watched this market emerge. So that was very interesting. So his premise was, you get blindsided. You listen to your biggest customers. You don't see new technologies emerge, and that's how big companies die. Now, that's not what happens in storage, and I'll explain why from my experience. Okay, so as Naveen pointed out, these were the main companies I was at. And what I learned from this is something that we all know, but actually living it in real life is very interesting. And what we know is that companies, very successful companies, are enabled by a big disruption that happens. Something happens to change the world, and that enables these new companies. Actually, it starts out with a few people recognizing this, and then building something innovative. And I view this as evolution in fast motion. It's like the asteroid hitting the Earth, wiping out the dinosaurs, and the mammals have a chance to emerge. And it's wonderful being in the valley because you see this happen every 5 years. So let's see what happened here. So at Sun, they were formed because the microprocessor emerged. Before the microprocessor, people used whole boards full of logic to create the compute engine for a system. But with the microprocessor, a grad student at Stanford, Andy Bechtolsheim, could put together a motherboard that composed the first Sun machine. He partnered with Vinod, who was going to business school. They also partnered with Bill Joy at Berkeley, and were able to assemble this $10,000 machine that basically ended up disrupting Digital, which was the dominant computer company at the time. Now Sun built these workstations, and so now you could have, for the first time, a computer on everybody's desk. But you had a problem. How would you share data across these computers? So Sun invented a very successful storage protocol called NFS. Before NFS came along, there was this thing called SneakerNet. You moved floppies from one machine to another. Very inconvenient. People hated that. So with NFS, you could use a network to move data across machines. Now, Sun ended up inventing NFS, but 10 years later, a new company was formed, which is NetApp. And I remember I was at Sun in the late 80s, and actually it was early 90s by then. And I read the first announcement for NetApp, and I said, man, this is great, because they were selling a system that was twice as fast as a Sun machine for $25,000, and Sun was selling that same piece of equipment for over $100,000. So it just didn't seem like they could compete. Now, how did NetApp do it? They basically now took a PC platform. So you could see that the basic underlying technology had evolved. You didn't have to start with a microprocessor. You had a whole PC platform. In fact, the very first system that we used at NetApp, we got from Fry's. You could just go off the shelf and buy it. So that was a huge change over what you could do, with what Sun had to go through. And the other thing that happened was that RAID came along, which was actually, there was a protocol called SCSI, which allowed you to attach for the first time multiple disks to a computer very cheaply. So now you had the ability to add a lot of storage to a system, and NetApp recognized this opportunity and created this file system called Waffle, which was RAID aware. And it could make a lot of disk drives go very, very fast. So they ended up taking over the NFS market. So that was a big innovation. Then you go down a little bit, almost 10 years later, and more innovation. So now, instead of a single CPU on a PC board, you get 2 CPUs on a PC board available from multiple manufacturers. And so compute becomes much cheaper. Storage became much cheaper. Disks fell below $1 a gigabyte. And so the idea for data domain became practical. And the idea behind data domain was that everybody would back up to tape, because tape until then was the cheapest way to store your data. But with sufficient amount of compute and sufficiently cheap disk drives, you could compress your data, and in fact, compress it by a factor of 20x. And so it became possible to store data on disk very cheaply. And tape was horrible. If all of you recall back to your tape days, whether you used cassette tapes in your audio player or video cassettes, you would recognize that over time, it would degrade, right? You would get all these blanks and hisses, and it would just be terrible. And the same thing happens with data stored on tape. It starts losing that data. And so a disk-based backup system was a godsend for system administrators, because it became much more reliable than a tape-based system. So that's how data domain took off. It basically created a whole new market and displaced tapes. So now, go forward, and at Nimble, in 2007, when Umesh and I were discussing what to do, we actually had 3 external disruptions. And one was the emergence of enterprise flash SSDs. The other was the emergence of multi-terabyte drives. And the third was the emergence of multi-core CPUs. So this was great. And this is one of the lessons of entrepreneurship for me. Sometimes it's all about timing. You just have to be in the right place when the right thing hits. And so we were lucky, because my prior company had just gotten acquired, and I was able to sit and think about this. And if I had been comfortable in another company, I may not have taken the opportunity to go do this. So for us, it was actually fairly straightforward. We had always imagined, what if we could take the best of what NetApp does for primary storage? Primary storage is the kind where you run all your important stuff on it, your databases, your email, all the important stuff sits on primary storage. So we wanted to combine a primary storage system and a backup storage system. And that way, you could reduce complexity and cost and improve things by sometimes orders, like improve your backup process, for example, by a factor of 100. So huge improvements in efficiency. So that's what led to the idea behind Nimble. And so not only were we able to combine primary and backup, along the way, we had some other advantages. It turned out that our product could give you a 2 to 5 times performance increase over an EMC or a NetApp for the same price, and a 2 to 5 times capacity improvement also, because we ended up using these really large disks and allowing them to go very fast. So that was the opportunity that we went after. Now, the interesting thing for me was that, and I've talked about evolution, that each of my prior companies tried to kill my next company and failed. So this is a really interesting situation to be in, right? You have all these friends in your prior company, and now they're trying to kill you. But that's how it works in the Valley. And of course, the thing for us when we were starting Nimble was, okay, now we have all these enemies. Are we going to, be able to wake up tomorrow and find that we still have a market? Because what's to prevent them from taking our market away from us? And so this is when you start reading books like The Innovator's Dilemma and saying, okay, does this apply to me? There was another really good book I read called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, Steve Blank. So that's a really interesting book to look at as well. And so it turns out that there is a fundamental hurdle, and it's not what Clayton Christensen says in The Innovator's Dilemma. In storage, it is actually really interesting. So you can think about storage as a very tall building. And at the base of the building, you have your foundational software. This is the file system. And what happens is, in the file system, that's when the team first starts out. You have the first 20 guys working on the file system for the first 1 or 2 years. And then after that, a successful company invests a lot of time and money. In fact, the investment can go into billions of dollars. So for example, companies like EMC and NetApp will have 3,000 to 5,000 engineers working for upwards of 20 years, adding features to that basic file system that they created very early on in the product's history. So now you can understand the problems that they have, because they've built this file system multiple decades ago, and now there are new technologies that require you to fundamentally change your file system. And so the dilemma that they have is that they could, the best thing to do for them, the thing that would give them the greatest efficiency, is throw away their design, start from the ground up, and create a whole new product with a whole new file system. But they don't want to walk away from these billions of dollars of investment. And these companies can see this coming. People saw Nimble coming from a long way off, but they can't walk away from their existing product lines and their existing customers who depend on those product lines. So typically what they do is they say, okay, we will just bolt on this solution to our current product line. And that's generally what happened. In fact, there's an interesting story just going back a little bit. When I was at Data Domain, NetApp tried to kill us by putting dedupe into their file system. And they actually did it. They put dedupe into their file system and gave it away for free to every one of their customers. But it was a bolt-on solution, not a fresh ground-up solution. And because of that, NetApp kept losing to Data Domain in the backup appliance market. And so in 2009, they were compelled to bid for Data Domain. And they got into a bidding war between EMC and NetApp. Eventually, EMC won. It was really exciting as a shareholder to be on the sidelines and watch the stock being bid up. But that's what happens when you try and bolt on something to an existing product line. So the last alternative is in the storage business, they acquire startups. And EMC has actually been very good at this. NetApp, not so much. But there have been a whole lot of startups in the storage space that have been acquired for multiple billions of dollars over the years. Clearly, Data Domain was acquired, but there's Isilon, 3PAR, Compellent, EqualLogic. There've just been a whole lot of companies. Once they get to a certain size, they become attractive to these really big companies and get acquired. So that was a lesson for me from being in the storage business. So to sort of conclude, I had some observations. So of course, this was based on just my experiences with storage, but in general, you have to watch for disruptions, because disruptions mean opportunity. An opportunity can come in very many different ways. Sometimes it is the kind of things that I talked about. A new threshold in computing, a new form of storage. Sometimes it is a company like VMware opening up a new market and changing things. Sometimes it's a new method of selling that can open up an opportunity. So they can come in very unlikely forms, and that's something that you have to be watching out for. And there are all of these things where you can see companies grappling with changes, and I've got a few examples here. Oracle and SAP, huge market caps. Oracle is $40 billion, sells $40 billion a year. I guess its market cap must be double that. SAP also huge. But they have this dilemma with everything moving to the cloud. With companies like Salesforce and Workday, it's just causing. So you can see this is a train wreck happening in slow motion before your eyes. And it's interesting to see, that they're just not being able to respond. Similarly, we've seen this in the security space. So watch out for opportunity, and it can come in very, very unlikely forms. And then finally, once you have decided on your idea, once you've decided where to go, talk with customers all the time. And this was a lesson from the Steve Blank book. You just have to know that what you're building is something that they'll buy. In fact, he had this very interesting piece of advice. He said, offer your product for free to a customer and ask them, will they take it? Will they use it if you give it to them for free? And that's sort of an iron test, because if they're not going to take it for free, if they're not going to use it for free, you probably should go back to the drawing board. And the reason is that the customer has to invest in your product. They have to start to depend on it. And if they're not willing to do it, even if the product is free, then you have a problem. You have to satisfy yourself that the market exists, because you have to understand that people are going to be willing to buy the product. You have to be the number one cheerleader for the product. And this is not just at a high level, somebody's paying me to do this, so I'm doing it. You have to inherently believe it, because you're going to be challenged all the time. There's an interesting story for another day sometime. Nimble almost died. And it was because our VCs did not believe in the direction that we were taking. And so there came a time when we almost shut the company down. And at that time, you have to stand up for what you believe in. You have to be able to say that, hey, I can go up against these big guys and win. And so that's the thing that you have to be inherently thinking about your product. So that's the advice that I have, and thanks a lot for being such a great audience.
Just now, regarding your VC thing, I think I was reading the blog by Jim Getz. In fact, I put it on the LinkedIn today. I think that was God, and which was very good, nicely written. Of course, kudos to all of you, your founders, and the team you built. And so there's a very nice blog. Jim Getz put, the Sequoia Capital, one of their investors, and so you should read that. It's really nicely written from Jim Getz, really talking about, and even not only that, they have their Series A PowerPoint slides, 17 of them. So you can see they're very simple slides. So many times, you create all these slides with all those graphics, and look at their slides, so you still get the money. So try to get the essence out of it. So anyway, so the point he was making in that was, I think the beginning, the product was more on the caching, right? And then you and your co-founder, you felt that you wanted to go after primary storage, which is, again, from the VC's perspective over last, 15, 20 years, it's been very hard for them to have any company succeed because of, number of factors, which you can obviously talk more intelligently about than me. Being customers not taking risks with startups, number one, as well as, no one wants their critical data to be put onto a new box which just came out hot out of the oven, right? So can you elaborate more on that? about that whole pivoting you guys did, you and your team did.
Sure. So it's very similar to what you said. So one of our, when we had set out to get funding, up to that time, and this was in late 2007, there had not been a successful storage company after NetApp, and NetApp had been formed in 1992. So the thinking amongst, and there had been several startups that had been funded and were going nowhere. There were companies like Blue Arc and Pillar Data, Panasys, Zambil, that had ended up just losing a huge amount of money. For example, Pillar Data lost $500,000. Luckily, Larry Ellison can afford that, but the VCs didn't like losing money. 500 million, sorry, 500 million. So we decided that doing a primary storage product and pitching that would be very hard. So what we pitched was an accelerator product that would sit in front of a NetApp or an EMC and speed up their product. And the VCs loved this. They said, oh, this is great. It's not going to compete directly with the big guys. And we'd love to fund you. Maybe they'll even help sell your product. But what we knew that this was going to be a small time window market because people would integrate Flash into their own products and not need us. So in the second half of our pitch, and you can find it online, we said we'll do a standalone storage product that will compete directly with these big guys. Now what we didn't realize was that the VCs loved the first idea, they hated the second idea. They funded us expecting us to deliver on the first idea, and maybe we'd never have to worry about the second idea. Now, 6 months in, the big guys moved much faster than we expected. And so we went to them and said, man, it looks like our market window is shrinking here, and we should move to the second idea. And that's when they said, man, you guys are suicidal. This has not been done before. And if you think you don't have a market window for your first product, and you're going to have to compete against the big guys, that's when we should consider shutting down the company. And so we went back and said, no, let's not shut down the company. We'll go with the first plan and build the first product. And Jim Getz from Sequoia was very gracious about it. He's a great VC, by the way. He was also behind the WhatsApp 19 billion purchase, so he's the top of the Midas list. Great guy, and very gracious. He wrote a very nice blog about it. So we worked on our VCs for the better part of a year. And during that year, we built the first caching product, got it in beta, had some customers who loved it. But after a year's worth of persuasion, they decided to allow us to move to the product we wanted to build all along. And so we killed our first product that was in beta and pivoted the entire company, which was a huge turn for the company, but they were very good about it. And within a year, we had our second product to market.
That's great. So just following up on the same question. So how do you, the idea of, like I said, the customers betting on you to test your product, especially for the primary storage. So how were you able to overcome that hurdle?
So this is actually really interesting, and it goes back to some of the skeletons you see in storage. So all these big guys that I talked about, companies like Blue Arc and Pillar Data and Panasys and Zambil, they all decided to attack at the high end of the market. And at the high end of the market, it's very conservative because storage is so fundamental to your business. If your storage is down, your entire company is down. So we decided very specifically not to attack the high end of the market. There are companies today who are doing it. So Pure Storage, for example, one of our competitors, is attacking the high end of the market, but they've raised almost $500 million. We went public with less than $100 million of funding. And we decided to attack the small to mid-sized companies. Now, compared to the big guys, there's the Fortune 500 companies. There are over 100,000 small-sized companies. It's impossible for an EMC or an HP or a Dell to defend that territory. And those guys don't care about about your track record so much as the advantages you bring to your business. So that's how we entered the market. Now, of course, we're going after the Fortune 500. So, but we have a track record now.
Great, awesome. So we are going to open it to the exciting questions you have, starting with Mr. Venk Shukla right at the end.
So, can you talk about the revenue trajectory and how would you compare that, you see, with Pure in terms of the the revenue slope that you had?
So Pure is a private company, and so they're not disclosing their revenues. They do claim to be growing very fast. So and there is evidence to support that they're growing very fast. I think they're just having to spend a lot more money than we did, and I hope they do well. It's we don't immediately compete against each other right now. In the future, we probably will. And when they file their S1, if and when they are set to go public, then we'll see their trajectory. Oh, our revenues. So the first full year of shipping, we did 14 million. The next year, we did about 55, 56 million. And then the most recent year, we did, I think, in the region of 120 million. Aparna Bava, our general counsel, is here. Aparna, do you? Yeah.
He's asking her whether he should answer or not.
Yeah, she can keep me in check.
That's why she's here.
Yeah, but there's this thing called Reg FD that Aparna sat us down and educated all the execs on. So we have to be careful about the data that we let out.
Okay, someone had a question. It's on Sequoia. You just do a search today. It's on LinkedIn. It showed up there. Actually, that's where I clicked.
Yeah, just search for
Jim Getz blog.
Yeah, Jim Getz Sequoia Nimble Storage, and you'll see a blog by him. And the blog is worth reading. And at the bottom of the blog is a link to our Series A pitch. So that's how we got our funding. It was a typical, two guys and a PowerPoint story. We walked into Sequoia with that. And they gave us about $9.5 million to start the company. So,
okay,
great.
Yes, please.
Varun, I ran into Ping last week at the Churchill Club, and he was talking about how you have all these new products and new ideas even after 4 years of being a company and IPO and everything. And how do you sort of keep the team motivated and look forward and innovate like you talked about, and have that spirit and keep competing with the big guys?
That's a great question. So Ping Li is on our board. He's a partner at Accel. And it's a great question. It's something that we thought about because, once you've gone public, now people are suddenly have a lot more, they've made their money, and what's to keep them and keep them there and keep them interested. Well, I think one of the big things, and we were talking about this today at an executive meeting, was, how do you keep your employees happy? And it is giving them an environment where they can deliver things and also pointing out the potential of where the company can go. Now, fortunately for us, our last year of revenue was 120 million. We are addressing today an $18 billion market. And we just have to look at companies like an NetApp or an EMC to realize where we could go. So there's a huge amount of potential in terms of what we can do from a technology point of view, and also even the ability to keep people growing their personal net worth by being in a successful company. So that's the messaging, and it's been it's been holding so far. People, we've had no attrition, lots of enthusiasm for what we're building. And people like to compete. It's nice to topple the big guys.
Varun, so initially you talked about how software played a big role in Nimble. Can you talk about your cloud platform that you have? How important was that for the success? And also, would that be a continued reason for growth for Nimble?
Sure. So we use cloud in a really sort of different way. Normally when people talk about the cloud, they think about, an Amazon or Azure or Google. So our insight was that we now live in this always on, always connected world. So every one of our arrays, thousands of arrays out there, connect back with us every 5 minutes and send us what we call a heartbeat. Basically, these are vital statistics of how the system is doing. So a lot of the time, people are, in fact, every customer is concerned that their system be up and running all the time. Because as I said, if your storage goes down, your business goes down. So what we've done, because of this always-on connectivity, is we offload a lot of that responsibility from customers. We have people watching it. We've written lots of tools that can watch all our installed base. And if we see that a system is going into a danger zone, which might cause an availability problem, we can proactively prevent that from happening. So one of the things that we're very proud of, which you have to do in the storage business, is have extremely high availability. So a measured availability across all our systems is what we call 5.5 nines. So that's 99.9995% uptime in a year. That's about 2.5 minutes of downtime in an entire year. So it has to be very, very reliable. And we use InfoSight for that.
The question I have is, Entrepreneurship 101 course is going on here at TIE, and this is the second week we are attending it. And there we are learning about the startups from a scalable, repeatable, profitable aspect. Can you give us some, I'm trying to relate to how Nimble scaled the revenue, and from a scalability, repeatability, profitability standpoint, can you give me some insight into that?
Yeah, and I think actually Steve Blank's book is quite interesting because they talk about different ways. You can do a startup that creates a whole new market. And that's a little bit different challenge from one that is also open, which is disrupting an existing market. So when you disrupt an existing market, the challenge we faced was fighting head-to-head against the incumbents. And there your entry strategy is really important. So I talked about coming in at the low to mid-range rather than the high end. That was very critical for us. So you, of course, first off, have to have differentiation. People want to have a reason to buy you. The differentiation has to be sustainable. And this is why I showed that picture of the skyscraper. It's a big barrier to entry for the big guys. They're not going to knock down their skyscraper to come after us. So we have sustainable differentiation, and we have a big market to go after. So that's one of the big advantages when you go after an existing market. The other thing advantage that you have when you go after an existing market is you don't have to tell people what you're building. You don't have to evangelize a brand new product. So it's not like Amazon telling people, hey, you can do online shopping safely. That was an evangelism cycle that they had to go through that we can totally avoid. So that was our approach.
Hey, Varun, congratulations. I have two questions. One, you said you walked into Sequoia and got $8.5 billion. But did you guys have to pitch to any other VCs? And then was there anyone, tell me about things that did not work before that. The second question, when you decided to pivot for a primary storage, the key thing is, all right, you're going to do that, but you already had the customers or beta customers, and how confident were you to go get the customers when you pivoted?
Sure. So going after Sequoia, now we had some advantages. It wasn't, we were surprised at the speed that we got funding. We had started talking to a few VCs. I'm not going to name exactly which VCs we talked to. They turned us down. They might not be happy about, but but we had talked to just a few. It was early discussions, and Sequoia turned it around very quickly. So I had the opportunity to work with Jim Getz earlier, and we showed him our pitch on a Friday afternoon. He calls us on Saturday morning and says, "I'm putting you in front of the partnership." And we had expected the fundraising round to go for months if we could get funding at all. So this was like a huge surprise to us. And he said, "Okay, by the way, here are the 10 things you need to do to your presentation to shape it up for your Monday morning meeting." And so we had a busy weekend. And next Monday morning at 9 o'clock, we were presenting to all of Sequoia's partnership. Scariest meeting of my life. You know, there's a few billionaires in the room, and they're like, you know, thinking over your plan, and you've got to persuade them. So we do the pitch, come away, and then we're waiting. And at 5 o'clock, we get a phone call from Jim Getz, and he says, "You're in." So that was great. It was luckily all of the anxiety was compressed into a couple of days. It worked out well for us. So that was the first part of who do we talk to. Your second question was about the pivot.
Yes, when you pivot to go off the primary product, you guys already had customers, or how confident were you?
So one of the things that we did was we hired our first sales guy, who was actually also the first sales guy at Data Domain. Awesome salesperson, and he's entrepreneurial. He came to join us, and so he was helping us sell the first product. And he'd lined up these great customers. Sony ImageWorks was a customer, loved it, and so we had talked to him about this plan to pivot. And he was actually on board with it. But when we told him we were going to kill this product, it actually was something that was kind of affected his bottom line a lot. Because sales guys, as you know, take half their money as cash and half or more of their money as a commission. And so what I told him was, we're going to stop selling this product. And that commission you were dreaming of for the next year, that's not going to happen. And so he basically took a 50% pay cut. And his job for the next year was to talk to customers. We must have talked to over 100 customers to validate that the next product was going to be successful. So that's how we sort of covered our bases. And he did that. He went on to be the most successful seller of the next line of products. So I'm really happy, he made the choice to stay on with us, even though we made the pivot.
Hi, I'm Yusuf Mamsa from tracktrip.com. Thank you for your talk. I wanted to get some more advice on talk with your customers all the time. Moving back when you were working on the product at the R&D stages and you had potential customers, when would you talk to them? When you have a prototype ready, or would you just go in and have a conversation way before the product is out?
Even before. So as I was saying, our salesperson, his name is Matt Jacobs, he started talking to customers as soon as we knew we were doing the pivot. And we had the basic specs in place. And so his job was to go talk to customers and say, if you had this product at approximately this price, we didn't know exactly what price it was going to be, but we had some estimates, would you buy it? And so we would go interview those customers, ask them for what features they needed. And that's how we accumulated all the intelligence. In fact, there were two reasons why we needed this intelligence. One was to of course, convince ourselves. But our board, as you know, was very nervous about this whole pivot. And we needed to convince them as much as we needed to convince ourselves.
Hi,
Hi, Varun. My name is Umar.
Can you speak up?
Sorry. Varun, I'm from Samsung Electronics, a big company. So your description of how big companies fail to kill the new players, I want some more ideas on that based on the fact that building the new file system, it might require only maybe 20 more engineers. So why don't new companies, in your opinion, old companies, in your opinion, make a new team that can build the new solution from bottom up?
Yeah, and that's exactly the question we asked ourselves. What's to prevent any of these big companies who have thousands or tens of thousands of engineers from taking 20 of their smart engineers aside and building something that will compete with us? Well, the problem ended up being, it's not that you can't take 20 people aside and put this together. It is that you have to kill an existing multi-billion-dollar product line. That's the thing that they can't convince themselves to do. So then you look at what other companies do. Cisco's had this approach of, for example, doing spin-ins. So they've done this with Andiamo in CME, a whole bunch of companies, where they take a startup, so they kind of distance themselves from the startup, allow it to grow to a specific point, and then bring it in. So that's one approach. EMC's approach, as I said, was to let companies grow to a significant size and then buy them. Now, by then they're paying billions of dollars, but it works out. I mean, EMC bought VMware for $600 million. And that was a home run. It's worth now, tens of billions of dollars. So there are multiple approaches to doing this. Now, if you fail at any of these, then you have a problem. And I'm concerned about where NetApp will go, for example. So NetApp's got a really good existing pipeline of products, but they are not, they haven't acquired a company successfully the way EMC has. And now they are doing a ground-up product for an all-flash array. We'll see how that goes. But these are the choices that you have.
Hi, Varun. Yeah, it's me.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Trevor.
Right. So, would you consider yourself to be a hardware company or a software company, or which leaning in which direction?
So on the outside, I think we're considered a hardware company because we sell systems. But internally, out of about 200 engineers that we have, 2 do hardware. So we use commodity hardware, and so there's no customization at all on the hardware. All the smarts we put in are in the software.
What do you think about the open compute and other systems that are basically coming up with really open source software as well as hardware?
That's a good question. So open compute is this initiative by Facebook where they said, okay, we have custom hardware within our Facebook data centers, but rather than have just one vendor deliver all this hardware to us, we will open up the specs and everybody can bid for our business. So from Facebook's point of view, it's actually a great business, a great idea to open this up. For us, if it leads to lower cost systems, then that would be interesting. So we've looked at open compute designs, and there is, they do have some interesting ideas. But up to now, people haven't started actually selling them. So we're looking for people to start selling those designs. And it might be a chicken and egg problem. They might be waiting to get big orders from customers before they start selling them. So we'll see. But it's an interesting idea.
You talked about InfoSight. As I understand, I think you guys have really pushed all the sensor data into the cloud, and it's really made much more, brought machine learning concepts into it. How did you really convince IT administrators to really adopt these kinds of, entirely cloud-based hosted management framework? Because they're used to, having an appliance model, right, even for monitoring and manageability side of things.
That's right. And so one of the hurdles to overcome is here's a system. that is running all your prized corporate assets, or maybe your payroll data, certainly all your email, will you allow it to send data back to Nimble Storage so we can analyze it? So it turns out that it's not a huge hurdle. There are companies that will not send us back this sensor data, but our acceptance rate or our enrollment rate for the service is in excess of 90%. And the reason people buy it, actually we offer it as a free service, the reason they take it is that it helps offload their headache of making sure that the system is operating cleanly. So, it's like if your car were sending back sensor data and it would alert you that you needed an oil change. And actually, as part of our support contracts, we provide that free oil change. So it would just tell you, okay, you need to come in, we'll give you a free oil change, and you can be on your way. So it's sort of like that. You know that your system is going to be monitored and taken care of if you sign up for that service. Yeah.
Hi. Maybe you covered this already. Can you comment on Pure Storage and Violin and Fusion IO? And also the second part of the question is HP's new D machine technology.
Sorry, which was the last one? HP's which machine?
They announced a new technology called D machine, which is specifically designed for the data centers.
Oh, okay. So referring first to, I'm not sure, I don't know too much about the HP machine, but so I'll comment on the others. Now, you talked about, okay. Yeah, so I don't know the details of that, but I do know about Fusion IO and Violin and Pure. And this is really interesting. This is where it absolutely mirrors, Darwinian evolution. So you have this disruption of flash hitting the marketplace, and it enables a whole bunch of companies to be formed. And that's what happened in storage. We had 10 different flash-based storage companies emerge. Now, over the long run, only a few of them are going to survive. But right now, everybody is trying to grow and reach for the sunlight. And so it's a really interesting time to be in the storage business. So Fusion IO, of course, built PCIe cards, and they had a lot of initial success selling to Facebook and Apple. And they were the first to go public, did well, but then Facebook and Apple discovered that there are other places you can get flash from. And so they've kind of hit a wall, Fusion IO, in terms of growth. So we'll see where that ends up. Violin was also an early company. They went public slightly before us, but they are seeing a lot of headwinds from companies like Pure Storage and EMC's Extreme IO. And so Pure is doing well. It's growing fast, as we talked about earlier. EMC's Extreme IO is doing well. NetApp has a new product that they'll announce probably by the end of the year called FlashRay. So right now, there's a lot of activity. As a customer, it's a really exciting time because you have a huge array of choices. And even as a vendor, it is interesting. We have a lot of targets to fight against. But we'll see where things end up a few years from now. It's very likely that in about 3 or 4 years, half of these companies will have died. Some of them will be acquired, and we'll have maybe 1 or 2 standalone companies left.
So just to follow up on his question, so what do you think of some other companies like Nutanix and Pernix Data Systems? They're coming up.
Very interesting. So Nutanix has also been growing very well, and from all accounts, they're growing very quickly. So,
but in terms of, I was asking in terms of differentiation in the
in their products
they have compared to other ones.
Yes. So Nutanix decided instead of being a standalone storage company, they would combine storage, compute, and even a little bit of networking. So their main value add is, hey, if you're going to put all of these together anyway, why not use our system to do it? And so this is diametrically opposed to the other approach, which is assemble a best of breed. And so, for example, we partner with Cisco with networking and compute. Cisco has UCS.
Yeah.
So we do occasionally compete with Nutanix, but from what we've seen, they are doing well.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, Varun. Sai Mukundan from Microsoft. Very inspirational, informative talk. My question is around scaling your business or the businesses you have been in, particularly from small to the kind of revenues that you're talking about. What are the challenges that you have seen in that space, especially when you grow these companies outside of the US and you have to go and acquire customers there?
In fact, we are going through that exact thing right now. So it starts out fairly simply. In my experience, when you start out as a startup, so certainly in Silicon Valley, and this is one of the big advantages of Silicon Valley, you can go with one sales guy, and he drives up and down 101 trying to look for customers. And if he's successful finding customers, you know it's going to work. So it's all a very self-contained ecosphere. You can see if things are going to be successful here. And then also in my experience, you expand out from the West Coast going east. These are with infrastructure companies. Of course, if we were doing an internet company, it would be very different. And so we did that. Then the next evolution is how do you grow internationally? And it is, as you would expect, you start out in Western Europe. So the UK, everything translates very easily to the UK, all your marketing messages. So that's our biggest market as a separate country outside of North America. Because Canada is almost treated as part of the US in terms of how you grow. I know they hate hearing that, but it's true. And then you expand into other parts of Western Europe. Now, we've avoided Southern Europe just because of all the problems they've had. So we've not had much presence in Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, certainly. So all our focus has been on Northern Europe. After that, we went to Australia, Singapore. So again, all the Anglophone countries. And then now, at the beginning of the year, we announced a partnership with Toshiba. So they're going to adopt our system and resell it in Japan. So things are moving forward. We do not have a sales presence in India yet, but that is on our roadmap. India and China should be happening this year. So the evolution, starts from what you would expect and then grows. But we absolutely have to be successful in these large markets. And there's a lot of work that needs to happen because it's not just hiring a few salespeople. You have to set up a marketing presence. You have to set up channel partnerships. You have to set up support. So we have spares depots all over the world. So there's a lot of infrastructure. So in the beginning, it's a very expensive proposition to develop a new market. And the hope is that it'll come up quickly enough to start paying back.
Hey, my name is Saurabh. I work at Adobe. Thanks again for the great talk. I was just curious if you're willing to speak about maybe like personal struggles that you had to go through, just being able to like balance like family life with the startup culture. If there are any tips there, what did you tell your wife?
Family life is great. His wife is here, even supporting, listening to him.
But that's one of the common struggles you have to think about as you embark this. So I was just curious if you can talk about it.
So this is something that, of course, I have to thank my wife for backing me up. It's one of the things that you have to have when you start out. So we had a conversation early on when we were getting started. And we knew that it would be a struggle, that it would be a lot of work. And it's not clear that at the end of it, you're going to succeed. So you have to be in it together. And in fact, there are a few conditions that are necessary. So the family buy-in is really, really critical. And it doesn't always work. Unfortunately, at Nimble, we had some people go through a divorce during the course of our growth. Then beyond that, it always helps to have a financial cushion. So that is important. And I was fortunate. I'd been through a couple of IPOs because you don't know how long you're going to go without a salary. And in the case of getting Nimble started, I went without a salary for close to a year. So there's that. And then, of course, the biggest thing is the timing has to be right. The opportunity has to. So in this case, it just happened that flash and multi-terabyte drives and multi-core processors were available. So if those three line up, then you're in good shape.
Okay. Any other questions?
Very inspiring talk, Varun. So one question is, one of the keys to running a successful company is to have a great team. So how do you go about identifying and building a team?
That's a good question. And we knew early on that we wanted to build a company for the long haul. So every decision that we made was based with that in mind. We decided, based on Umesh and I's earlier experience, to have what we call a no jerks policy. So it turns out to be really important. You have to have people in the company that are easy to work with. So we have this, this culture in our company of having very involved and very heated discussions about directions, which way to go. And it's never personal. And that's worked out very well. People are not there just to push their own agenda. They will hear you out. So the no jerks policy has been very, very good. So we looked at people for their track record. We wanted to make sure you hire smart people, make sure you hired people who culturally fit in. And one of the things I'm really proud about is our executive team. So our VP of marketing was the 5th hire that we had. And it's really interesting watching a person like that scale. Our VP of sales came on as the 20-something hire that we had. And the job that they're doing today is 4 or 5 times removed from the jobs that they had to do over the course of the years. And it was great that we had this, these fundamentally smart, easy to work with people who then figured out how to scale their jobs with each step in the company. And that's one of the things I'm really proud about at Nimble, that we've not had any executive turnover. We've had the same people, just expand in their jobs. So that's great.
Hi, my name is Suhas Joshi. First of all, congratulations. And the question has to do with timing. You talked about timing a bit about SSDs and how they are becoming popular. And also I noticed that it was founded in 2007. 2008 was a recession year and following a few more years. So how do you find that? I mean, was that helpful to you compared to now? If you go out to build a team now, would you do that now, or would you have rather done this in a recession year anyways?
That's a great question, and actually, again, they talk about inspiration versus luck. There's that famous Thomas Edison saying about 99% sweat and 1% inspiration. Here, I think for entrepreneurship, you actually have to get very lucky. So the 2008 recession was the best thing that could have happened to us. And I'll explain why. Because the market tanked and it was terrible. But for Nimble, it turned out to be great. Now, we got our funding at the end of 2007, which was a great time to go look for funding. It was an exuberant market. The VCs had their wallets open, so it was easy to get money. So we got our money. And then the next thing you got to do is hire great people. And it was impossible to hire great people. It was just very hard. The market was doing well. Everybody you talked to had a great deal going at their startups. We went to a lot of the early data domain guys we knew were doing well. But Data Domain had just gone public, and those people weren't willing to move. So we struggled, and then the market tanked in the fall of 2008. Lehman went under, and startups started going under. And it's great when a startup dies, well, for the people who remain, because the very best people stay till the end. And when they finally close their doors, you suddenly have a group of really talented people who are available. So we kept an eye on a few startups that we knew were on treacherous ground. And when they did go under, we hired half our team from a company called Agami, which is a storage company, that did die in the fall of 2008. And so that helped us a lot.
It was Jambil, I think, initially, right?
It was Zambil that then changed to Agami.
I remember one of my VCs from my company, in the restart, he was the lead in that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they helped. Not only did we get people, we got a lot of equipment very cheaply from them too. So
I'm sure. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah.
So, Varun, thanks for the great talk. Obviously, you've been very, very successful. And most people will be saying, okay, let me retire and travel around the world, but you're not doing that. So what keeps you going?
So this is a discussion we have at home quite often.
He wants to build next generation of storage box again.
No, I think this is something that is actually common of a lot of entrepreneurs and people in the Valley. I really don't know what I would do if I wasn't doing this. I'd go nuts, sitting at home, and so this is something that just keeps me going.
I should actually add to that. I think he really loves what he does, and he's very passionate about it, and that's just it. I think Varun always says, he said, I would work even if I wasn't paid, or I like doing what I do, and I think that's where the passion comes in. And yes, it is a debate. We have a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old. So our 6-year-old was, I was pregnant when Varun started. So it's been interesting over the last several years, but he just loves doing what he does.
And I have the support of my lovely wife.
Venk?
This is the last one? Okay.
Well, after that, we'll decide,
All right,
depending
okay.
on your question.
So just just on behalf of TIE, I'm Venk Shukla, I'm the president of TIE. I've been listening to this thing. I have to tell you, this is for all your successes. You are amazingly modest guy, and the humility and the thoughtful answers that you gave are very, very refreshing. So thank you for doing what you did.
Thanks very much.
So, thank you, Venk. So last question for some of the entrepreneurs. Let's say if you had to start, I know you're busy with Nimble Storage, you'll be busy there for many years since you're there for the long haul.
Yes, I am.
Yes. So how about some ideas, since you keep coming up with ideas like your VC was saying, for some of these hungry entrepreneurs, I see right one over there. That's our Bitsian friend, you know him, Rajesh. So some ideas you can share, something they can do. Nothing, of course, you're not going to talk anything about related to your company, but in general, in storage.
So disruptions are, truthfully, I've not been thinking in that mold right now. All of our mental energy is given to attacking, the big storage market that we have. And so that's where all of our innovation is focused. But there are always, disruptions that are happening around us. And the question is, where is the opportunity for a startup? So, there are things, large trends like, mobility, cloud, Internet of Things, driverless cars. There's just a huge number of big things that are happening. And what you have to think about is, where are the opportunities in here for a startup? And so it's sometimes you just need time to think through these and look through the opportunities. Silicon Valley itself has been just doing fabulously, we still have a hard time hiring. So, and the rate of startup growth has, if anything, accelerated. So, so there are definitely people going after lots of ideas.
Talked about a few other companies, storage areas. What do you think about the other guys in the same space, hybrid storage like Tree and Agile? What are they?
Of course, we do meet them in the market and compete against them all the time. It's going to be interesting for them, and the reason is that in technology, generally, there's a winner-take-all thing that happens. You know, so Microsoft became the leader in, you know, in PCs. Oracle became the leader in databases. Intel became the leader in microprocessors. Now, there are times when these get challenged. So Microsoft is now being challenged by, say, Android and Apple. Intel is being challenged by ARM. But these disruptions take a long time to happen. In our case, you know, we had this crop of startups. Once a winner starts to emerge, it becomes really hard for the other companies to compete effectively. There's another book written by a guy called Jeffrey Moore called The Gorilla Game, and it talks exactly about this. He says in every market, you have the gorilla, which in every technology market, the gorilla gets the king's share of the profits and the market, and the chimpanzees get the scraps. And so their challenge, Tijal and Tintri, is to avoid becoming a chimpanzee.
So, and before we adjourn, as you heard, you as an entrepreneur, those who are married, you need to have a very supporting spouse. And obviously, Varun has one. She's here also to listen to his story. I'm sure she's heard him many times. So let's give her a big round of applause first for being here. And of course, to Varun's legal counsel also is here. I mean, from Nimble Storage. So let's give her a round of applause. And now let's give a big round of applause to Varun for sharing with us, like Venk said.